Hello.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Here we are.
How are you?
Not bad.
Oh God. One second.
No worries.
Oh God. 1 second. I think someone.
Hey, how's it going?
Woody.
You want to come and join us on screen?
Oh. Hey, May. How are you doing, babes? I think we did like literally. Do you want to come onto the screen, May, or are you good like lurking in the background like a little creep?
Be interested to see how many we have along tonight, I suppose, with it being Friday and Saturday and done. I think
Yeah,
having a look through the stands there, and things seem pretty quiet. So
yeah, I spoke to Abby earlier on, and she had like 5 people, and I'm like, I think everyone's just in the main stage ones today.
hey, mate.
But also it's Sunday.
Hi, Matt. You guys,
yeah,
look great. I wish I could take the skis with you, but I'm arm deep in rum, basically.
there are worse positions to be in, I'm sure.
I know, right?
I'm just going to check if Ellie said there was anyone joining from the company today. I think there might have been one name.
Yeah, she did, but she did yesterday as well. And I don't think they turned up yesterday.
Let's have a look.
Yeah, there is.
I'm going to take a photo. May just creeping into the whiskey session.
One second. Please remember.
Ellie Nash.
Maybe.
I'm going to leave. Right. Good luck, guys. Enjoy.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.
Oh God, how do I leave?
I think it's Simon Owen potentially today.
Right.
I think is to join from sales.
Great.
Who was the name she said yesterday? I think she did say a name yesterday. I don't remember if we saw that. Nick Bell. Oh, we did have a Nick yesterday. That he did join.
Wasn't Nick Bell?
Was it not Nick Bell? Who was it? It was a Nicholas something.
It was Nicholas Boris or something like that.
Nice. There we go. We've got a few. Oh no, it still just us. Looked at the wrong number there. I saw a 5, but it was 205, which is us too.
Oh, it's Mayday Simon. I love Simon.
Nice.
Oh man, so what? I mean, obviously we're gonna wait for a little bit. How was your day today?
Good, thanks. Yeah, it's nice. Lou still had her family up visiting from London, so we're just in town showing them about after yesterday's torrential rainstorm.
I can't believe we went to Candyman yesterday. It's literally one of my fun fact about Candyman. It's one of my favourite places in Edinburgh. You know the hills on the way up there? Do you know what they are?
When you say the hills, as in the ones going through.
Yeah, as you're as you're going through town, they're all graveyards. They're all graveyards where they had to mass bury it after the plague, and they just kind of covered it up. So, and you see them around the Candyman more than anything else. Basically, they used to take people out of town and just dump them in open graves, and that's what. So they're not actually natural hills.
Jeez, I didn't appreciate that. You learned something. The history of Edinburgh, when you look actually into the background, is pretty grim.
Oh yeah, 100%. 100%. So I was just like, I think Craig Harper told me that because I did a half and half.
I think we've got someone joined in. Is it Mark? Hello, welcome to the session.
Hello, welcome to the session. We're just going to hang around for a little bit because obviously people have been leaving last sessions, coming into this session, and we've only been on for a minute. So
perfect. We say 5 past. Same as last night. Yeah. I think this technology is still pretty new to everyone, and I know for some folks this has been their first day today.
Hi Kyle, nice to meet you.
And Kyle in as well. Hi Kyle. We're saying we'll give people just a couple of minutes to join the session, guys. Just I think with being the first virtual whiskey show and everyone's still figuring out technology, we've usually had a big uptake kind of after the first 5 minutes in. So we'll give everyone just a couple of minutes to get settled, and then we'll kick off with the session.
If anyone would like to join us on screen, it's always nice to see a friendly face, especially when you're drinking whiskey. Just hit the button to enter, and I'll let you into the screen. If you also would like to prefer to sit there and drink whiskey. In private, I understand that completely, and there's no judgment here.
I think it is meant to be a smaller session tonight, though, guys, from the numbers, because we had our biggest session was on Friday, and I think it's kind of been gradually dropping down as the weekend goes on. But to those who've just joined the session, hopefully, is this your first session of the day, or have you been enjoying the festival so far? Some other tasting sets and main stage events?
Now we see how fast everyone can type.
There you go. Second.
Okay.
Brilliant. And then third for Cal. Nice. What have you guys been at so far then? Anything stand out for you today with what you saw? We have noticed, I think, Andrea, with having the later sessions, everybody's typing has got a little bit slower by the end of the session. So I think that's definitely an indicator.
Yeah, because on Friday I was a little earlier and everyone was like fast off the bat.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Oh, God. Well, this is actually my first round today. Yesterday I've had a couple before the session. This is actually my first one today. So we're going to take it quite easy today. Sunday. Relaxing. So we've got some really, really cool whiskey for you guys. Has everyone got their whiskey packs today? Some really, really special stuff that's come from our distilleries tonight.
So Kyle, are you joining with a pack or are you just sort of watching along tonight? Perfect.
Fantastic. Should we, will you get people to get another glass now, maybe?
Yeah, we're saying, I think with the whiskies we're tasting tonight, because we're trying some of the core range alongside some exceptional cask, I definitely would encourage you to have extra glassware, because we're saying rather than kind of finishing the glass, rinsing out, then going on to the next, if you have another glass side by side, I'd say literally the best case scenario is having 5 glasses where you can kind of come back to things, especially between that. I have 5, no problem. Excellent. Glad to hear you're all set up and good to go, Kyle. This is not your first rodeo. This is
practiced and poet. I mean, you'd want to think so after the third. This really is a very small session today. Very intimate.
I think if it's anything like the last ones, we have a lot of other people just dropping in and dropping out, don't we? Without the tasting sets, kind of later on having a scan through. So
yeah.
On Friday, I think we went from 5 officially at the start to about 15 within the first 10 minutes. Justin, welcome to the session. Justine, sorry. And this is without a dram. I've not had a single one yet. So. So Justine, welcome along. We're saying we're just about to kick off in the next couple of minutes. And we're just giving folks a little bit of time to get themselves in. So say with being the first virtual whiskey festival, I think just making sure everyone's got the link, figuring out the tech is always a good thing. We're saying as well, I think it is going to be a lovely intimate session tonight. So if you have got a webcam and you want to join in by webcam, it's nice for us to kind of see you guys interacting with the whiskey as well. So as I say, if you're not too shy and want to join, to anyone who's sitting in the background there, do feel free. It definitely makes it a much more interactive session for us anyway. But if you do just want to sit and chill behind the scenes with your webcam off, that is also perfectly acceptable on a Sunday night.
Everyone's like, oh, no, not me. Right, should we? I mean,
yeah,
should we get started? Do you want to?
Yeah, guys. So welcome along to our session. As I say, I think we've put together a lovely little tasting pack for you. And we know Kyle's got the tasting pack. So Justine, I don't know if you've got it as well. But we have really a mixture of some of our core range for Aberfeldy and Royal Brackla, really just to show off how that looks and how that tastes. And then we have a comparison between some of our lovely exceptional cask range. So with the Aberfeldy, we have a lovely 15-year-old Pomerol. And then with the Royal Brackla, we have two 20-year-old exceptional casks, which were rather special. Very, very limited for both myself and Andrea. The week sort of leading up to this, or for me, for the week leading up to this, was my first ever chance to taste them. And Andrea, you got your first taste actually last night.
I did, and I did get my first taste last night.
Safe to say you enjoyed the Royal Brackla. I think that was
I enjoyed it very, very much. Yes, absolutely.
But let's see what the favourites are throughout the show. So guys, I think it's always nice to kind of know who's sitting in front of you, talking away at you today. So my name is Matthew Cordner. I have recently become the global brand ambassador for John Dure & Sons across our lovely single malt range, which you'll see sitting behind me on the top shelf there. I say recently, so recently, in fact, a global brand ambassador normally gets to travel the world. I think I am definitely the least global brand ambassador in history since receiving the title, as I've barely left my own postcode here in Edinburgh today. I've been in the industry for about 13 years now. I am a local to Speyside. I grew up in a little village you'll hopefully have heard of called Craigellachie, which just happens to be one of the lovely whiskies within our portfolio. I worked as an ambassador across a few different distilleries up in Speyside. Got put into a grad program to travel the world for a few years as ambassador. My last job, I was based up at Aberfeldy as their brand homes ambassador, looking after all the sort of VIP visits and special guests, but not only at Aberfeldy, also up our other distilleries that are normally close to the public up north. And then, as I say, in the last sort of 6 months, have taken on the mantle as global brand ambassador. But lucky you will not just have to hear my voice droning on all night. They've added a lovely a co-host with me to balance me out as well. A dear friend and another person who can talk just as much, if not more, about whiskey than me, I think, here. They've given you the two blethers tonight.
I know, was that a little dig on yesterday?
So, no. My mother always said I could blether for Scotland. Andrea gave me a run for my money last night. We were having a proper battle with time to get into the session. So if it's anything like last night, you're in for a lot of fun. But I'll pass on, Andrea. Do you want to say a little about yourself as well?
Yeah. Hi, guys. Welcome to the session. So my name's Andrea Montague, and I am the UK brand ambassador for all of our wonderful malts and dewars. Unlike Matthew, I didn't grow up in Scotland, as you could probably hear from my accent. I'm based in the very rainy and very miserable East London at the moment. And I come from a very different background from Matthew. So we both come at it from a very different viewpoint. I actually started off in cocktail bars, ran some bars in London, traveled the world a bit running bars, and then I came back, and whiskey has always been my love. So I've worked in whiskey as an ambassador. Prior to this, I worked for Diageo and looked after their single malts and Johnny Walker. So I am very well versed in a lot of whiskies. But I've worked with whiskey for about 8 to 9 years now, solely on whiskey. And prior to, I've drunk whiskey for a hell of a lot longer. I'm from a family of big whiskey drinkers, so the apple did not fall too far. That's a little bit about me. I think now, because I know that Matthew and I do have a tendency to go over slightly, let's get into the session. If you've got the kit in front of you, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go straight out of the gates and pour yourself an Aberfeldy 16-year-old, because there is nothing worse than hearing someone talk and watching the whiskey and not having anything in your glass. So if you do have the Aberfeldy 16-year-old, please pour yourself a glass, have a little nose of it. I'm not averse to you taking a sip of it before we get to the tasting notes. Really familiarize yourself with it, because this is a brilliant example of what Aberfeldy really has to offer. So, guys, cheers to you. Cheers. To start. A little bit about the distillery. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of the distillery, and then we're kind of going to go into the tasting sessions, and then we'll go into each dram one by one. Hi, Jack. Lovely to see you entering the session. Aberfeldy is one of our, actually, to be fair, you've got our two most beautiful distilleries tonight, Aberfeldy and Royal Brackla. But Aberfeldy for me is very, very special. It's located in the centre of the Highlands in Perthshire, and it's at this bottom of this really lush, beautiful valley. If you've ever been, it's just outside of the town of Aberfeldy, and it was purchased by a gentleman. Hi, Abby. Purchased by a gentleman called John Alexander Dewar, and he purchased this in 1896. And it was a distillery. It was the first distillery, and it was the only distillery that the Jewish family actually built. And he obviously didn't build it himself, but he chose the location of the distillery for three main reasons, really. In Scotland, you're nothing without a really great water source. So we have one, like everyone else, you use more water to make whiskey than literally anything else. So you do need to have this really plentiful water source. And for us, we have it from the Petilly Burn. We're located right next to the River Tay, which is the longest river in Scotland. Longest and fastest we have with the Spey, don't we? But longest river in Scotland, the River Tay, and we get our water from the Petilly Burn. The Petilly Burn comes from the Pool of Aberfeldy, which goes over the falls of Monet, through the Berks to the Petilly Burn, and we take our water source from that. And the Petilly Burn was quite famed for travellers in those days. It was somewhere where you could go and I actually also have swum in the Tay, Abby, during a storm. I don't recommend it. Genuinely don't recommend it. But we take our water source from the Petilly Burn, and it's a place where travellers used to go and change their fortunes. They used to go and pan for gold there, and we have alluvial gold running through the water source. So it's this really wonderful, magical place that people used to go to. And Aberfeldy itself actually means pool of the water gods. I guess a place where you could go and literally change your fortune. So, sorry, I've got to stop reading the comments because I'm kind of starting. Matthew, you can just give me a heads up if anyone says anything. Yeah, so we have this wonderful water source, the Petilly Burn, and we call Aberfeldy our golden dram. There's two reasons why we call it the golden dram, but I'm going to go into the second one a little bit later. So we have this wonderful water source. We also have an exceptional train line all the way down to Perth. So we get our barley up from Perth, and more importantly, we can take our whiskey back down to Perth. And we have this fantastic train link, rail link, where we take all our whiskey up by this little train called the Puggy. And if you actually go to the distillery, we have a Puggy and a little bit of a short track outside of the distillery. And it was actually yesterday that I found out that it actually wasn't the original Aberfeldy Puggy, but quite the Balvenie Puggy that we've repurposed. Dalhuen, my apologies. That we repurposed. But we have this incredible train link. So that's two of the reasons. And the third one, and perhaps my most favourite, is his father, John Dewar, the founding member of Dewar's, actually grew up not far from there in a small croft down the road. So it's kind of got that real sentimental value as well. It almost comes full circle. You know, John Dewar started there. John Alexander Dewar built a distillery because his brother, Tommy Dewar, fantastic marketeer, like extraordinaire, ahead of his time. Also very, very flamboyant. Was outspreading the word of Dewar's, and we needed a whiskey. We needed to buy a distillery. We needed to be able to produce a whiskey to become the heart malt of Dewar's. So this is Aberfeldy. We were brought in. They bought the plot of land from the Marquis of Breadalbane in 1896. We actually didn't start producing whiskey on site until 1898, and he employed this fantastic man, an architect that literally changed the absolute face of the Highlands to build the distillery. And I don't know, has anyone here heard of a gentleman called Charles Doig? So for me personally, I'm a massive fan. I know you're a big fan of Charles Doig, Matthew. He literally changed Scotland as you see it when you go up to the distillery. So if you have a think, and I want you to, as everyone's been to a distillery, it's really hard when you're, yeah. Yeah. So if you think about the distillery, what's the one thing that you like, you know, picture a distillery in your mind's eye, and what's the one thing, what's the like kind of character that you think? And for me personally, it's that little triangle at the top of the distillery, otherwise known as a Doig ventilator or a pagoda roof. But if you want to be real nerdy, it's a Doig ventilator. And this was a fantastic way of being able to wear the barley in the maltings without getting it wet. These days, very few distilleries have their own maltings, but every single distillery still builds this Doig ventilator or this pagoda roof on top. And it's almost kind of saying who you are. If you look across the valley, you see a building, you see that little triangle on top, and you know that is a distillery up there. And as I said, he was a famous architect. He changed the landscape of Scotland. He actually built 56 distilleries, or designed 56 distilleries. I doubt he built them himself in his lifetime, which for me, I mean, that blows my absolute mind. He was very, very busy. So that's a little bit about our distillery. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about the whiskey that you put in your glass. So this is Aberfeldy 16. Now, you can't talk about Aberfeldy without talking about the production and our long fermentation. It's literally the signature of the actual distillery. We've got this real honey backbone that runs all the way through the range, and you're going to get in here. So I'll talk a little bit about what you've got in your glass in a second, but distilleries average fermentation times is around 49 to about 50 hours, and we go from 65 all the way up to 85 hours with Aberfeldy, and this really encourages those big flavor bearing esters to come out, and they're those really rich honeyed stewed fruit, kind of plums, apples, but really rich and silky esters. And then when we get into distillation, it's a very slow distillation. Like we don't want to kind of run the stills hard and fast. We want to encourage this character. So before we even talk about wood, the distillery blush is very much a honey dram. So when I said to you earlier on, there's a reason why we call it the golden dram. For me, that beautiful honey gold is also the reason why we call it the golden dram. I'm going to take a sip of whiskey in a minute because I need to catch my breath. But this is Aberfeldy 16. This is a really great expression of Aberfeldy. This is a combination of first fill bourbon, rechar bourbon, and refill bourbon. And then we finish this in Oloroso casks. We finish it for around 6 months in Oloroso casks. And if you have a little nose, has anyone got any tasting notes that you want to offer up? For me personally, I get almost like kind of, obviously fruit cake, you get this real honey note, but it's almost like a really dark honey. And I'm a bit, since working with Aberfeldy, I have a lot of honey at home, a bit of a honey aficionado, but it is that dark kind of, hi, Jason.
Hey, Jason.
That really dark kind of honey. It's got caramel, it's got smoked almonds, it's got a little bit of spice to it also. You've got this clove kind of note, you've got a tiny, like, I wouldn't even say a lick of smoke, I'd say a suggestion of smoke in it, you know, like it's like, and it's gone. What does just a whip suggestion. Yeah. And it's, what does it, has anyone got any tasting notes? Does anyone want to offer anything up?
I think for me, it's just that honey note, as you've said, and I think that's what we really see across the whole core range of Aberfeldy in particular, is that balance of the fruity notes, but really it's the honey for me that comes through in the nose, and again sort of develops as you keep tasting.
Yeah, so I also get, I don't know, this is going to sound really funny, but instead of like everyone talks about vanilla, I get like a custard note from it, because it is that rich vanilla. It's like creamy vanilla, like a creme brulee kind of thing with the sugar on top and the thing.
Slightly burnt.
Me. Yeah, absolutely, definitely. But you get this really rich note. Is everyone enjoying the Aberfeldy 16-year-old?
Kyle said there, yeah, really sweet honey toffee, 100%, and that green apple. There's that lovely fruitiness just alongside. Yeah, perfect tasting note.
Yeah, absolutely. That literally looks like you've just taken it off the back of the bottle. Well done. So that is our Aberfeldy 16-year-old. Now, as we said before, compare and contrast. If you have got another glass with you, I'd like to introduce you to Aberfeldy 15-year-old. And this was launched last year. And this is our fabulous master blender, Stephanie McLeod, who's won a number of awards lately. We're super proud of her, but she has been let loose to experiment and have some fun. And she is creating these insane, exceptional casks. And this was like one of the first ones for Aberfeldy.
One of the first ones, a wine cask, yeah.
Yeah. And so this is finished in Pomerol. And is anyone here familiar with Pomerol? I'm going to tell you a little bit about it if you have, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it if you're not. So Oh, strap in. Right. So this is Aberfeldy, 15-year-old, and we finished this for 4 to 5 months in Pomerol casks. Pomerol comes from Bordeaux, and in Bordeaux you have 2 different banks. Bordeaux is super, super small as a wine region, and you wouldn't actually realize how small it is because of how big the wine is and how popular the wine is. Pomerol comes from the right bank of Bordeaux. Now, the banks are very, very different in style. On the right side of the bank, where we're from, or we, the famous royal we again, the right bank is really sandy, really warm, encourages the grapes to go really big and plump and fruity and grow really, really fast. And whereas the left bank is quite cool and quite clayey in the soil. So you get 2 very, very different grapes. We are all about the right bank. We're all about Pomerol, and we're all about the Merlot grape here. As a Merlot grape is big and it's jammy and it's cherry and it's tannic. And if anyone is familiar with Pomerol, you might have heard of a little brand called Petrus. That literally, I think when Petrus came along, it skyrocketed Pomerol with regards to auction sites, with regards to people drinking it in very fancy places. I'm a huge fan of Pomerol. I would love to say I'm a huge fan of Petrus, but my budget doesn't stretch quite that far. But what I love about Pomerol and our exceptional cask, the finish that it gives to it is because it's kind of the rogue of the wine world. And in a French wine world where everyone has a lot of AOCs, we have 2,000 acres in Pomerol, and they have 136 suppliers of wine in there, and they are doing whatever the hell they like. So you get like you get this really big, powerful, robust kind of wine with lots of tannins in it, and this for me goes perfect and goes hand in hand with Aberfeldy's really rich, stewy honey note, and they kind of with finishes, and with anything with wine or sherry, when you're finishing. Obviously, you have compare and contrast. So it's some compare, complement, and contrast. And so you have something that goes either exceptionally well with the other thing, like marriage-wise, case in point, or you have something that contrasts. You would have maybe a really big, bold, smoky whiskey in a Pablo Cortado cask, and you have in this like kind of delicate, or the Fino cask, and that seems to also work. So here we have just a really fabulous example of something that complements it. So I implore you to pour yourself a dram. If you have got 2 glasses, kind of go back and forth between the 2, because obviously the 16-year-old finished in Oloroso. This is 4 to 5 months in Pomerol. And kind of just see the difference between the 2. You've got those kind of like smoked almonds, but for me here, you've got very much this, it's almost like a fruit burst. It's almost like a pie, like it's just that smoke's pushed further, the tannins are pushed further.
It's big jammy fruits as well.
It's jammy fruits, it's sandalwood on the nose. But you still get that massive honey note running through the back. It doesn't go. It never goes. And for me, that's a sign of a really skilled blender, when you can still taste the whiskey that you've got, that you originally had.
The distillery character.
And the distillery character, yeah. When you can still taste that, it's a sign of a really skilled master blender. Because I want someone to put like just a silk jacket on the whiskey. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to cover it up entirely, just the frosting on top. And that's what a really good cask should be.
A lot of people I think have commented, why is it only 4 to 5 months kind of in that finish? And I think that's really why Stephanie said it's what, that's why it's about keeping that balance.
And with that, with having a very short time in a cask with wine, I think I've done, has anyone got any questions about Aberfeldy, by the way? Is everyone enjoying the whiskey? I can see you're all in here, but. Well, in that case, I'm going to pass over to Matthew, because Matthew's got 3 whiskies to get through. And yesterday I took a lot of his time up and I left him with about 20 minutes. So I'm going to pass over to you, Matthew.
Thank you very much. I will say one last thing for Aberfeldy. Gary told me this the other day. So Gary is our new brand homes ambassador, based up the distillery. He told me a new fun fact. So I didn't realize there was an official name for this, but you were saying about John Dewar's obviously home, the family home, being really close to the distillery. So it was a little croft called Shenville. But the village he was actually born in must have one of the best village names in Scotland. So before I say it, does anybody know in the group? Feel free to type it in the text box if you know this one. Bonus points will be awarded during this session. It means absolutely nothing other than brownie points, but you might get yourself some brownie points. So does anybody know the name of the village John Dewar was born? I'll be really impressed if you do. We'll give you literally 30 seconds in the text box for this one.
I'll be honest, I don't actually.
So it must have one of the funniest village names. Are you ready for this? So it's Dull, literally D-U-L-L. So that is the village that John was born in. So again, of course, Dull means like boring. And I will say they have a good sense of humour in Dull, because when you drive in, the first thing you see on the signpost is "Welcome to Dull." And they've twinned it with a little town in Oregon in the United States, which is called Boring. So you have Dull and Boring are paired little towns around the world. And then it went one even better. There's a little place in Australia now called Bland have jumped on. So now you have Dull, Boring and Bland. And the official name for the link between those three villages is the Trinity of Tedium, which is what Gary told me the other day. I think that must be one of the best things I've ever heard. So there we go. You'll never forget where John Dewar was from anymore. As I say, if you ever do visit Aberfeldy Distillery, which I highly encourage you all to do, drive just a little bit along the road and you will come into the village of Dull. So there we go. That's my fun fact I learned the other day from hanging around with our resident distillery nerd, Gary Ross.
Grain Man.
As well, there you go. We call him, you might have seen the movie The Rain Man. I call Gary the Grain Man, because if you want a random number factor figure, Gary has it there rattling around his head. So there we go. But as Andrea said, we have 3 other whiskies to get through today. We're moving into one of our distilleries we don't really highlight, I think, enough. I think we're going to start highlighting it more and more as exciting things are coming in the not too distant future. But it is our oldest distillery within our group, Royal Brackla. So again, like Andrea said, I think there's nothing worse than starting to talk about this lovely distillery when you've not got a dram from that lovely distillery in your hand. So as soon as you're ready, if you've got your glasses in front of you, grab a glass, and we're going to start with the Royal Brackla 16. So if you've got that to hand, pour yourself a little Royal Brackla 16 just now. Again, I'll come on to talk about a few tasting notes just after a little bit of a history introduction to the distillery. But again, the 16 is one from our core range with Royal Brackla. So just like with the Aberfeldy, where we have a 12, a 16 and a 21 in the core range, we have the same for Royal Brackla at the moment as well, a 12, a 16 and a 21. With the exceptional casks we're tasting, obviously having the 15-year-old Pomerol there for the Aberfeldy, and shortly moving to 2 20-year-olds for the Royal Brackla exceptional cask range, we thought this was kind of the nicest one to get a good understanding of the core range and then sort of compare it and contrast it with the exceptional casks. So as I say, have a smell, have a taste, sit and enjoy that one. And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Royal Brackla. As I say, it's the oldest distillery within our portfolio of 5 different single malt producing distilleries. It was built in 1812. And for anyone who knows a thing or two about distillery history, having a legally founded, legalized distillery in 1812 was no mean feat, as there was a big legislation, an Excise Act, a change in 1823. And it was really from 1824 onwards, we saw a lot of distilleries, especially up in the Highlands of Scotland, and especially within Speyside, starting to legalise and get their licence. So the reason for that really was the tax rate was so high. Most of these people up in the Highlands making whiskey were farmers, crofters, people who've been doing it for hundreds of years. And until the government said, you must pay a licence, a tax, they were making it quite happily, and all of a sudden they all became illicit whiskey makers. But one man decided to pay his license as he thought, I am onto something here. I've got something very special. And even though it's an expensive license, I'm going to put that money forward and get my whiskey out there. His name was Captain William Fraser. He was a local man to Brackla, which is the village our distillery is based in. Brackla, for those who don't know, is it's not in Speyside, it's just outside of Speyside, so we call it a Highland whiskey. If you know the village of Nairn or the town of Nairn, it's probably the closest sort of major place to Brackla, but really it's just outside Inverness, kind of coming along that northeast shoulder. Now, So he became known as Captain William Fraser after his time in military. So he left, I think, Brackla about 14 years old, went off and served in the military for a few years, became a decorated soldier again, and returned as Captain William Fraser. And when he returned to a family farm. So his family were what we call tenant farmers, and they took over a lease from the landowners. And all of that land, that estate, was on the Cawdor Castle. Now, some of you might have heard of Cawdor before without really realising it. If you have heard of Shakespeare's Macbeth, it refers to the Thane of Cawdor in the Cawdor area. That is where we're talking about. So a lovely tie to history there with Shakespeare's Macbeth. Brackla itself, just as an area, has a lovely storied history as well. I could go down a rabbit hole on this, but we actually became RAF Brackla again, and one of our water sources comes off a source known as the Air Force, the Airfield Spring, again, when we were Royal Air Force Brackla during the Second World War. So it's a really cool, interesting area, lots of cool sort of storied history around us. But as I say, with Captain William Fraser deciding to legalise and build a distillery in 1812, he was recorded as saying to government at the time, when he was trying to campaign, for bringing the tax rate down, and that campaign would eventually lead to that 1823 Excise Act. He was recorded as saying, I'm having trouble selling my whiskey within 120 miles of the distillery. And I think that shows you the sort of distance we're talking, rife with illegal whiskey kind of up in that Highland area in Scotland. Now, this didn't deter him from producing whiskey. It just meant he had to send it a bit further afield, and actually sent some whiskey down by land and a lot down by sea. Again, being up on that northeast shoulder, having access to the North Sea, he was able to sell a lot of whiskey down, send a lot of whiskey down to London. And in London, the whiskey really found a name for itself. Very quickly, it was picked up with the lords and the ladies and the gentry, and probably none more famous than a man known as the Citizens' King, King William IV. And I think he basically became the #1 fan of Royal Brackla. So much so, he deemed it, it was then heralded as, under his request, the King's own whiskey, and became known in writings at the time as the Royal Brackla, the drink divine. He loved it so much, in fact, in 1833, he awarded it the first royal warrant with the rights to use the word royal in your distillery name. In the history of Scotch whisky, there have only been 3 distilleries which have been allowed to use the word royal within the distillery's name itself. So as I say, in 1833, we went from being Brackla Distillery to Royal Brackla Distillery. We've got a few guys in the call here. So again, I'm really second brownie point up for grabs of the evening. You didn't quite get the first one. Let's see if anyone will earn themselves a brownie point here. Does anybody know any of the other 2 distilleries in Scotland which have the word royal in their name? Now, there's one I would expect you to get because it's still up and running. It's quite a famous one.
Absolutely, Royal Lochnagar.
Very well done. No hesitation there. So I'm going to give you half a brownie point for that one. But I'm going to give 2 brownie points, a real bonus mark, if you can get the next one.
I don't think until you've told anyone, until you say it to other people, it's a really obscure one.
Now,
so.
I think it is particularly obscure because it's now closed down. It was officially mothballed and I think actually dismantled. I think it was in like 1985. It sits just outside of Aberdeen, really in Stonehaven. It's where it's at. There's 10 seconds left. Anyone can get it into the text box. No Wikipedia here, guys. Let's see, anybody? I think my brownie points are safe today. It was actually, again, not a prefix. It didn't come before the name like Royal Brackla and Royal Lochnagar. The Royal came after. It was Glenurry Royal. But as I say, that was closed down, completely destroyed and dismantled in, I think it was, 1985, there or thereabouts. But we were the first. Again, I think Glenurry got its warrant a couple of years later. I think it was like 1835. And I think Lochnagar was like I did write down here somewhere, 48, because I always forget that one there. But the first, I think most importantly, the first to be able to get this accolade was our Royal Brackla, the drink divine and the King's own whiskey. Now you know a little bit about the distillery. It's lovely past. Again, I could literally talk about the amazing history the distillery has. We are going to be over at our stand after this, so if there's anything else you want to find out about Royal Brackla, Aberfeldy, the histories, or any of our other distilleries up there, Craigellachie, again, which is my hometown, I could literally talk the rest of the night on that one. So as I say, pop over and see myself and Andrea on the stand. But for now, if you've got that 16 in front of you, let's have a little smell and a nose. I think the first thing you notice whenever you stick a Royal Brackla under your nose is it has this lovely perfumed note alongside these lovely big fruits. And again, the cask we're using here for the 16, it's a combination of ex-bourbon and ex-sherry, and it's some first fills and also some refills, and also what we call rechars. When they're at the end of the life, we'll give them a new lease of life with stripping that down, recharring, and it's almost like having kind of a new cask good to go again. So it's a bit of a combination of those. For me, though, with Royal Brackla, you always get that lovely kind of perfumed nose, and you're going to see that across the two 20-year-olds we're going to come onto as well. And that's something Stephanie says she gets on the nose, even with the new make spirit, she gets that straight away. And it's really down to the sort of the character of how we create that character within the distillery. Stephanie refers to that as like summer in a glass, and I think that's such a wonderful descriptor there, because it's kind of like fresh fruits and this lovely kind of perfume note just sailing over the top of the glass. And again, once you dive into that glass, you dive into the tasting, that's where some of those other sort of darker, richer, I think, notes come through, really sort of down to the cask element. So let's have a little taste. Whiskey fit for a king, indeed. It's just this lovely, rich, and it has this lovely, elegant long finish, I think, across the entire Royal Brackla range from the 12 all the way through. It just sits on your tongue. If this was the last whiskey you had before bed, you'd still be tasting it tomorrow morning, sort of thing. I think it really just sort of coats the palate. Absolutely lovely. Really, what we do in the distillery, how do we achieve that character? If you've ever seen Royal Brackla now, it's a real shame because it's not open to the public. If you were to drive up there, the guys will normally give you a wave out the lovely big front roller windows. You can pull up for some photos and things. They do allow that. I think it is, as Andrea said, probably our two most picturesque distilleries we're talking about tonight. Aberfeldy is this beautiful old Victorian, as a Doig built distillery. Royal Brackla, again, an old distillery. It did have an expansion across the late 60s, early 70s. So we have these beautiful big roller windows on the front of our stills, and 4 lovely big copper pot stills. Again, we have 2 wash stills, 2 spirit stills. And the view the guys have from the still house looking out must be one of the best views in Scotland, full stop. And they look out over our cooling pond, which is, as I say, called the Cawdor Burn. And it's kind of like this beautiful tiered cooling pond, and right away in the back, and you can just about spot Cawdor Castle. And again, it has lots of nature kind of coming over it, this lovely little wooden bridge kind of leading over the middle. The ducks have the best gig, as I say, it's our cooling pond, so it's like their own little jacuzzi for them. So very happy, well looked after ducks at Brackla as well. But it is just the most picturesque place you're ever going to see. Royal Brackla seems to be generally overlooked by whiskey enthusiasts. Yeah, a great question, a great point here. Why do you think this is? I will say this across our whole range, really. We only took, as a company, as again, we are John Duran's sons, but we fall under the Bacardi name. And that kind of deal was struck, and we became the official owners in 1998. Before that, it was the DCL, Distillery Company Limited, which eventually became Scotch Malt Whisky Distillers as well. And then eventually we become the company today is Diageo. But basically, in 1996, when Diageo became Diageo, they had a bit of a monopoly. They were told by sort of regulation, you have too many distilleries, you're not allowed that. And they had to work off selling the proportion, and that's when it was sold to Bacardi. But, really, when you think of the company back then, the DCL, there were loads of distilleries under that name. Very few were bottled as single malt, and most of them were important blending components. So I think, Royal Brackla is one of these whiskies that was kind of a best kept secret by blenders in many ways. As I say, that lovely kind of perfume note that just lifts it. It works so well historically across a number of big blends. So, today, people really love talking about single malts, and I think from the 1960s onwards, single malts is where the conversation went. But for almost 100 years, I'd say from the 1860s till the 1960s, blends were king. And, still, if you look at the proportion of blend, where Scotch whiskey is kind of put and how it's sold as a single malt or a blend, blends are still massive today. So you need some really good whiskey, some really key components to elevate those blends. And I think that's why Royal Brackla, amongst, I'd say, really the rest in our portfolio there, has kind of, not had much of a name for itself, unless you're a real whiskey enthusiast. And, we're looking at all these lovely kind of independent bottlings. Yeah, exactly there. So, as I say, we bought the company over. We, again, the royal we all say, Andrea, as I say, Bacardi bought the company over, which we are part of, in 1998. But you think about the previous company didn't really think about selling them as single malts. So it takes a while to get your stock in order. You know, these kind of stock plans don't happen overnight. When you're talking, you know, we start with a 12-year-old for the range, and when you want to create a range, of course, you can't just put everything out as a 12-year-old. You need to let other whiskies age as well. So really, it was only since 2015, under a sort of group banner, which was called the Last Great Malts, and we really sort of put a focus on these 5 whiskies as single malts in their own right. Justine, hopefully that answers your question. As I say, my mother said I could blether for Scotland. You very rarely get a quick answer from me. Hopefully that wasn't a quick answer, but it was a useful answer.
That was a quick answer for you.
So, Justine, does that answer your question? Hopefully it does. Perfect. You're very welcome. But hopefully, as I say, this is a nice intro, I think, to not only Royal Brackla, but really our core range of Royal Bracklas. Because again, across the whole core range there, we're playing with those different casks. I should say as well, all the Royal Bracklas, although it's a combination of those bourbon and sherry, everything at the end we put into Oloroso casks. So we use Oloroso sherry casks kind of like as a finishing for a period as well. I think Oloroso works beautifully with Royal Brackla because you have that lovely little spicy kind of note. As we said with the Aberfeldy 16, again, with putting into the Oloroso to finish there, you get that kind of lovely, kind of warm, Christmas cakey spice, you know, like sort of cinnamon, cloves, that kind of note coming through there as well. A wonderfully rounded whiskey, again, with those lovely kind of top notes. The new make spirit, I think, for Royal Brackla, she says as well, has a lovely clean acidity. And what Stephanie, our malt master for this, has said, that cuts through some of the bigger notes that can be quite often overpowering. And I think that leads us beautifully into talking about the next two, because we're going to look at 2 20-year-old Royal Bracklas now. The 2 cask, I can't call them finishes because they're not finishes. It's what we call a double casking, double cask for this one. And we have a Moscatel, and what we've written down on the label is a French red wine cask. Now, for the next 2, guys, if you've got the tasting pack, I don't want you to do one and then the other. I really want you to pour both side by side, because I think to really understand the difference, I want you literally going back and forth with them on the nose. So take a minute just to pour that now. While we're pouring those, guys, go for it, Andrea.
No. I was going to say, when you put them both together, when you juxtapose, like, between 2 whiskies, any whiskies anyway, you're going to get much more from the whiskies because it makes your nose work a lot harder at picking them out, picking out notes. So anyway, I mean, I fully encourage drinking with both hands most of the time, not for drinking a lot.
Responsibly, of course.
Responsibly. It makes your whiskey work a lot harder for you. Yeah. And if you can't get something out of the nose, by putting another whiskey next to it, you go back to that whiskey and instantly it'll pop out for you.
Now, luckily, this is the last one of these we're doing live, because I've literally just finished my sample bottle. I didn't speak to the right person, so I got the sample bottles like I'm sure you guys have at home. You'll see Andrea behind you there definitely spoke to the right person, because she managed to get full bottles of each. So Andrea, next time I'm down in London, I know who my best friend is going to be and whose house I'm going to go round to for a dram. When we're allowed again, of course, we're not at the moment. So that is officially the end of my Royal Brackla 20. No, it's not actually. I've just realized I've just poured myself another 16. So I do actually have some more there of that lovely red wine cask one. Let me refresh the glass. I thought I'd gone through that one awfully fast. Let me chuck some of that in. And guys, are there any questions before we go into these last 2 on the 16-year-old Royal Brackla, on anything we've said so far about the history of Royal Brackla? Now's a great time for those questions. A silence in the text box. I'll take that as a good sign, and you're just dying to dive in to these 2 20-year-olds. So, guys, the reason I want to do these really side by side, what percentage goes to blends? I'm honestly not sure, Kyle, and I think it's because it really will vary year on year. And it's one of these things, I would hate to be in the forecasting team, because you never know what's going to go on with the sort of world markets, how things are needed. And again, we're doing lots of deals, not only being used within our blends, we of course use our single malts that we have, or our new make spirit coming from these single malts, to deal with lots of different companies. As of course, we have big blended whiskies like Dewar's and like William Lawson's as well. So we need to have a lot of things that we can trade. I'm sure Royal Brackla will be a key trading commodity there. So I'm sure it will be used as kind of a bit of an ace up our sleeve to deal with a lot of other companies, blending companies where we need whiskies. But I do think more and more is going for single malts. Again, really just down to demand more than anything else. But I couldn't give you a figure, I'm afraid, because these things are one, above my pay grade, but two, it really will change all the time. But I'm sure it's still a fairly large amount will go for blending, but more and more is going in for single malts. That I can say for sure. But a great question. The 20-year-olds now, as I say, these two 20-year-old casks, now they're written on the label as double cask, and I think that can lead to a lot of confusion because it's not an official term. If you like, different companies talk about double casks in different ways. They might say, it's a whiskey that's, been half of it's been matured in one cask, half of it's been matured in the other. They bring them together. Hey, that can be called a double cask. What we mean by double cask here is it's almost a single cask. Technically, it pretty much is, but we're not allowed to call it that because it has changed cask. So what I mean by that is we have filled two casks. They were refill bourbon casks. They were filled on exactly the same day in 1998. The whiskey was matured. We then, I've got the date here, where is it? The 16th of October, 2007, we took the whiskey from those two individual refill bourbon casks and we transferred that into our two secondary casks, hence double cask. And it was about 9 years, just over 9 years, but 9 years, 10 months and 29 days or something in those initial bourbon casks. And then for the next 11 years, it was transferred and spent its life in the Moscatel, as I say, for that first one, the 20-year-old, and for a red wine cask, which I'll tell you what that is in a minute, for the second one of these exceptional cask samples. So again, being single casks, and again, it wasn't multiple batches of these done. The bottle numbers for this was really, really limited. So I think it's for, let me just check my numbers here, I don't want to lie to you. 192 bottles were produced of the Moscatel, the first one we're going to go through here. And it was 220 bottles of that red wine cask one as well. So this is our really, really limited Royal Brackla. As I say, I only got my first taste of this a couple of days before the whiskey show kicked off when my sample box arrived. We are doing so many cool, little, exclusive, exceptional casks at the moment. It's so hard for me to keep up. And basically, I'm only getting to taste a lot of these really obscure ones just before the tasting. But it is always like Christmas is coming for me when something like this is getting sent in the post. And I've got to say, these have been two of the best samples I've been sent in a long, long time. And I think two of my new favorites. I won't say which is my favorite yet. I want to see what people's are before I maybe sort of sway their mind. But yeah, really, really limited.
You and I both have different favorites,
we do, which is an interesting one. Yeah. So that means that you can keep one of those bottles, Andrea, and I'll keep the other. that's the deal, right? But
it's really also worth mentioning that they are cask strength as well.
Yeah. So again, the strengths here, what was it? 52.9 for your Moscatel, and we go up even more to 53.3 for that wine cask finish. Now, something at cask strength like this, I would normally say I'm probably going to add water pretty quick. That said, I think these are really, really drinkable at their strength. Surprisingly drinkable. But if you haven't already, as they have a smell, I definitely encourage you to go back and forth between the two. It's a really nice comparison in the nose. And you can see for two casks that were put into wood, from being new mixed spirit on the same day, transferred on the same day, removed from cask on the same day, you couldn't get two more sort of different whiskies from Royal Brackla than these two. That lovely Royal Brackla note we talked about, I think that lovely sort of perfumed note, that sort of summer in the glass that Stephanie talked about, you see just sitting on top of both of them. But after a little bit, the nose kind of adjusts kind of past, as I say, those are kind of really the notes that sit at the top of the glass. Once your nose kind of gets down into some of those deeper notes, that's where you start to see those secondary casks really coming into play. If you haven't had a taste, do so now.
They're literally night and day from each other.
A bit of water in between them as well.
Yeah.
What are folks' thoughts again in the text box for those who have these samples? What are you thinking so far? The red wine.
That's exactly the word that's exactly the word I used for the red wine yesterday. That was my tasting note. Yeah.
It's that kind of damp, earthy. I think that's it for me. As you say, dunnage, kind of in that style. It's this earthy. For me, there's kind of tobacco-y kind of notes in there. A bit of a kind of damp, but in a good way. Exactly as you say. Dunnage Warehouse describes that beautifully.
Damp cigar.
And not a bad smell, exactly.
No.
Almost a little sort of sulfury kind of note in there as well, I think, for the second one. But we were saying, last night in conversation, sulfur gets such a bad name but I think it's such a wide range, a spectrum of notes. On one end, you have that horrible rotten eggs, kind of you do not want in your whiskey. And at the other end, we have, that kind of, what's the word I always say? Kind of
match.
Yeah, a match, or I'd say kind of like sort of candy floss, kind of this like burnt candy floss kind of sort of note as well. Kind of playing, I'd say, into Craigellachie sort of territory. And again, that's kind of my sort of go-to whiskey, which I think is probably given away, which my favourite was from the two here. But let's have a little bit of a discussion. Again, so of course, the Moscatel here, that's a sweet dessert wine. Are these the first properly Royal Brackla single cask releases? No, there have been others across the sort of history since we launched in 2015. Again, the whole idea with exceptional casks is they're limited runs. When they're gone, they're gone. And usually they're for certain markets. So they're not always available in every country. It literally will be for a limited time. Really travel retail is where you find a lot of these as well. But these ones, as I say, the only place you really get them now is the Whiskey Exchange. There were a couple of other small retailers were given a small number of these bottlings as well. It wasn't a purely an exclusive to the Whiskey Exchange, but that pretty much is the only place you're going to find them now. There have been a variety of other ones using different casks, but I'd say this is the last ones I can remember kind of in recent times, which is a real exploration of kind of different wine casks. So I think that's the way Stephanie, our malt master, has really been going down the sort of wine cask route. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing. You saw there with the Aberfeldy. We talked, of course, about the 15 Pomerol there. That was last year's. This year for Aberfeldy with the exceptional cask range, we've just launched another French wine cask finish, which is the Pauillac. If you enjoyed the 15 Pomerol, I highly encourage you to get the Pauillac, because as Andrea said, we were talking about left bank and right bank in Bordeaux, kind of as two of the big sort of flavour camps. The right bank there, she said, kind of the Wild West, if you like, of Bordeaux. A lot less rules and regulations maybe compared to the left bank. Further inland, again, much warmer, things ripen quicker, bigger, punchier, juicier, fruity notes, jammy notes. That Pauillac is kind of big, tannic, later ripening. I kind of think what you think of your textbook.
Cold breeze, haven't you?
So it's right on the Gironde River.
So you get that Atlantic breeze that kind of hits the bank, and you get a very late season.
I've gone totally off topic though, as is quite normal for me. Back to Royal Brackla here as well. So as I say, I think you're getting typical of that wine. You can imagine this, and we were saying this last night, occasion for this one. You've just finished a lovely meal, you're on your dessert. This would be your dessert whiskey, going perfectly in place, I think, of a dessert wine, and that lovely sweet notes. And again, I think someone called it out there in the notes there, very sweet by comparison. The Moscatel, a much sweeter note. And I think this is kind of your really elegant side of Royal Brackla. You're getting those summer in a glass notes, the lovely big perfume, but you have that lovely sweet note at the back.
I get like a lot of nectarine also. And then you get like, obviously the sweet grapes, but I get that really bright, when you smell the nectarine skin and it's almost perfumed as well. Yeah. I get that kind of note with it.
It's definitely, big fruits. And for me, raisiny was one that we called out. I think that's one of Stephanie's kind of official tasting notes. Yeah. But I think it's those kind of lovely, as you say, rich, fruity, dried notes in there as well. Compare that now to that, as I say, 20-year-old from the French red wine. Now, we can say this cask, again, comes from, a wine area, which is Châteauneuf-du-Pape as well, which, again, when you think of top French wines, again, this one isn't from the Bordeaux, this is from the Rhône area. Again, so where's that again? Southeast sort of France. It literally means the castle of the new castle of the Pope, because apparently I think it was in like 1308. The Pope got kind of chucked out, sent over to France, and I think that's kind of where he based himself, or just next door to there is Avignon as well. So that's where the region takes its name from. So we're talking about whiskies fit for kings. I think this one would be fit for the Pope as well. It's that kind of vein. Lovely, elegant Royal Brackla over sort of tones, but as Kyle called out there, that Dunwich warehouse, funky, musty kind of note as well. As I say, for me, this is everything I love about Craigellachie, but in a Royal Brackla. So honestly, this is my new favourite whiskey of the moment. And if we're talking again about times for this, if the 20-year-old Moscatel was your straight after, a lovely meal in place of a dessert wine, this is my last dram before bed. It's like 2 a.m. you've just been chatting with your mates round the fire, pop the cork, bottles going round. This is definitely the nightcap. And I was talking about Royal Brackla having that ability to just coat the mouth. And if it's the last whiskey you tasted that night, you'd still wake up tasting it tomorrow morning. I think this is a perfect example of that again. The viscosity on this, again, being up at cask strength, just coats the palate beautifully. Any thoughts across these two? We have managed to somehow keep within time, which for the two of us, as we say, is a pretty rare occasion. Are there any questions at all, not only maybe on the Royal Brackla here, but across the range of the tasting?
If you guys also have a little thought, like, I mean, some people just want to have a little break and then it comes back. We're going to be on the stand. So if you want to pop over to the stand, if you've got any questions, as Matthew said, we can also talk about the rest of the range. I've also got them down here in my drinks cabinet.
What I find as well, I was pacing myself, as when you're on screen with these, you don't want to be overindulging, so we say. But I kind of had them as I was tidying away all my computer and stuff after, getting ready to sort of sit down, watch a bit of TV after, and I had my two Royal Bracklas. I had just a little bit left in the glasses to sit down and enjoy after. And it was one of these whiskies, leaving them kind of as I was packing away for 20 minutes. I'd added just a splash of water into each during the tasting. It's amazing how much they open up in the glass. So again, I'd encourage you, even when we're finished here, if you can leave a little bit in the glass, maybe for sort of 5-10 minutes, come back to it again after adding a splash of water. And it is like this new whiskey where it just blossoms. It really, really comes alive in the nose and on the palate as well. But guys, it's been a real treat tonight as well. For me, it's been a real treat. I hope you guys feel the same way. As I say, someone who's had a lot of our Royal Bracklas in my time, I think this is some of the best that we've ever produced. Something really, really different, and still to say within the Royal Brackla story characters. We said, I think that has to shine through to be a good whiskey, so you know where it's come from. But just something super unusual for Royal Brackla. As I say, I feel like a kid in Christmas, with these two new samples. Which have you guys enjoyed? Which has been your favourites for the guys with cask samples? Pop them into the text box here. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, I don't think it's not been a secret which one's been my favourite. And I think, Andrew, you said you were the same, the Muscatel, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know what? It's so different for me because Craig Gallagher secretly is my favourite. And I really enjoy that big, robust, like waxy kind of style of whiskey. So I thought I would have preferred the red wine cask because it's like a bigger, funkier style of whiskey. I genuinely did. And then as soon as I tried the Muscatel, I tried them against each other. I also get this like kind of rhubarb note in the Muscatel. It's like this sharp, acidic kind of note that's really bright. And I love it. And it's so unusual that for me, it was 100% the Muscatel.
Kyle, is agreeing with you there. He's saying tonight leaning towards the Muscatel. But I think you put a good point out there. It depends on the mood as well. I think we've seen two very different sort of spectrums within our company, though. Within Aberfeldy, obviously opening up the evening. I think when someone says if they're new getting into whiskey, that is always my go-to distillery of choice. I think because Aberfeldy, as I say, that lovely honeyed note that shines throughout the whole range is just such a great starting point. I've never met anybody who doesn't like Aberfeldy yet to this day. And I would say, yeah, but at the same time, I also think if you're a connoisseur, you've been round the block on different whiskies, it has so much to offer as well. And I think it's one of these that has such a wealth of flavour. But then Royal Brackla, as I say, one of our kind of not so championed whiskies that I think really is getting this kind of cult following, slowly but surely kind of building. And as I say, watch this space, cool things to come from Royal Brackla in the not so distant future. I'll say that without getting myself in trouble. I think I'm allowed to say that. But guys, I hope you've enjoyed this evening. Andrea, thanks so much again. It's always great not to hear my voice droning on for the evening. Having a lovely perspective, as I say, from the other side of things there as well with Aberfeldy. Guys, any questions? I say we'll both be on the stand from now, so we better get a move on and head over there. But anything else, please just reach out and give us a shout.
Thank you so much, guys, for listening to us and taking time out of your night.
Thanks so much. Take care, guys, and hopefully we'll see you on the stand. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.